Michael stood at the massive windows of his office, the golden light of late afternoon catching in the glass. The city stretched before him, alive with the energy of 1,000 stories unfolding in quiet corners and crowded streets. San Francisco, a place where dreams were made and sometimes lost. He had built his empire here brick by line of code by line of code. At 52, his life looked perfect from the outside. The sprawling tech company, the private elevator that carried him silently to his penthouse, the sleek Tesla in the garage that waited each morning. Yet there was something missing, something he couldn't quite name. And as he stared at the city below, he wondered if he had been chasing the wrong things all along. Across town, in a small apartment perched above an old bookstore, two young men sat quietly by a hospital bed. The hum of machines, steady and faint, was the only sound breaking the silence. Jason and Alex, twins, 25 years old and carrying the weight of something that felt much older. Their mother lay between them, her hand pale and fragile in Jason's grip. Her face was thinner, worn by months of illness, but her eyes still carried that fire they had known since childhood. The same look she had when she worked double shifts at the diner, just to keep them fed. The same fierce love that pushed them through school late nights bent over books while she whispered encouragement. And no, there was so little time left. Jason's voice broke the quiet. "Mom, you've been talking about him more and more lately." He hesitated, his thumb brushing her hand gently. "We're old enough now, we deserve to know. Who is he?" The question hung there, heavy, waiting. And Sarah, their mother, blinked away the tears that threatened to fall. She turned her gaze from one son to the other. They were so different. Jason, always steady, the one who weighed every word before he spoke. And Alex, all restless energy, driven by instinct and heart. But there was something in them both, something that wasn't hers alone. She exhaled slowly, as if releasing a burden she had carried for far too long. "Your father," her voice trembled, soft and distant, "is Michael Bennett." The words were a shockwave. Jason felt it first, like someone had taken the air from his lungs. Alex sat back, his mouth slightly open, his eyes searching his mother's face for some sign this wasn't real. But it was. Michael Bennett, the name that echoed through the city on billboards, in magazine articles, whispered at every tech conference. The man who'd built Bennett Innovations into an empire. The man whose life seemed as far from theirs as the stars. Why? Alex's voice cracked, but he didn't care. "Why didn't you tell us before?" Sarah's fingers trembled as she reached for the worn leather journal on her nightstand. It was old, its edges softened by time. "I was young," she whispered. 22, working as a software developer at his first company. He was brilliant, passionate, and married. She opened the journal slowly, her hands tracing the pages as if each one held a memory too precious to speak aloud. "When I found out I was pregnant, his company was barely surviving. He was working around the clock, trying to hold his marriage together, chasing his dream." Her breath caught in her throat. I would be the one to ruin that. So I left." Jason and Alex sat in stunned silence, listening, understanding and yet not. "You raised us on your own," Jason murmured. "All these years." Sarah gave a faint smile. "I kept this journal," she said, placing it gently in Jason's lap. "I followed his life, every success, every headline. I wanted to be able to tell you someday." She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion pulling at her features. "And now he's hosting a charity gala next week at the Augustin." They had heard of the Augustin. Everyone in the city knew it was where the powerful met, beneath gilded ceilings and shimmering chandeliers. Jason's hands moved slowly over the journal's cover. Inside there were photographs, clippings from newspaper snapshots of a man they had only ever seen from afar. Michael Bennett, young and full of fire, standing outside a garage in Palo Alto. His eyes the same green as their own. Later that evening, back in their apartment, Jason and Alex sat at the kitchen table. The journal lay open between them, page after page of a life they'd never known. "Look at this," Alex said, pointing to an article from 1999. He almost lost the company. 3 days from bankruptcy until he landed the Watson contract. His fingers traced the headline. "If that deal hadn't happened." Jason finished the thought for him. "None of this would exist." They both glanced toward the window. In the distance, Bennett Innovations towered over the city skyline. Jason tapped his laptop, bringing up the company's website. "He's giving the keynote at the gala," he murmured, talking about bringing AI education to underfunded schools. Alex gave a humorless laugh. "Helping kids like us," he said softly. Except we were clipping coupons and hustling scholarships while he was changing the world. Their mother's apartment told their story. Photographs of their graduation plaques for academic achievement, evidence of a life they had fought for. Jason the lawyer, Alex the pediatrician, both driven by their own visions, and yet somehow always orbiting the world of the man they never knew. Jason stared at the glowing screen, deep in thought. "Remember that park across from Bennett Innovations?" he asked quietly. "How Mom used to take us there every weekend." Alex frowned, then realization dawned. "She was giving you him," he said. "Little glimpses." Jason nodded, his heart aching in his chest. The only way she could. Alex opened his phone, scrolling through photos of the Augustine. "It's invitation only," he said. 3-month waitlist. "We're not getting in." But even as he said it, the look in his eyes was something else entirely. A plan was forming. The kind that their mother had taught them, the kind that required persistence and belief in the impossible. Jason leaned back in his chair, his mind already racing. "We'll find a way," he said. And in the distance, the lights of Bennett Innovations gleamed like stars in the night. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the old clock their mother had bought from a second-hand shop years ago. It had always kept perfect time, as if determined to defy its worn edges and faded numbers. Jason sat at the table, his fingers tapping a restless rhythm on the wood, while Alex stood by the window, staring out at the city lights. They both knew the clock was ticking louder now. Not just for Sarah, but for the answers they had waited their whole lives to find. Jason's laptop screen glowed softly in the dim light. "He's divorced," he said quietly. The words hung there like something fragile and sharp at the same time. Alex turned. "What?" Jason scrolled down the page, slowly reading the details of the article. "Finalized 6 months ago. After 27 years. They looked at each other, and suddenly it made sense. Why Sarah had waited so long. Why she had stayed silent, thinking she was protecting him, protecting his marriage, and protecting them. And know that marriage was over. Whatever she had been holding back for his sake didn't exist anymore. Alex's jaw tightened. "We need to be at that gala." Jason closed the laptop. "For Mom," he said. "She deserves that." Their mother had spent 25 years carrying a secret she thought was for the best. Maybe it was time to lift that weight. Maybe it was time for her to see what happened when the truth finally had its day. Alex thought for a moment, then pulled his hospital ID from his jacket pocket. "I treated the manager's daughter at the Augustine," he said slowly. "She had a rare condition. We caught it just in time." Her father was grateful. Maybe grateful enough. Jason gave a faint smile. "That's a start." The next few days passed in a blur. Between hospital visits and long hours at work, they pieced together a plan. It wasn't perfect, but then neither was life. They called in favors, wrote careful emails, had quiet conversations with the right people. By the third night, they were staring at 2 heavy cream envelopes, their names written in elegant script. Alex ran his fingers over the embossed seal. "We're really doing this," he said almost to himself. Jason's reply was quiet. "We are." But then came the question neither of them wanted to ask. What if he doesn't believe us? "Alex," said his voice barely above a whisper. Jason looked at his brother. "We show him the truth." And the truth's there, in the leather journal, in every page their mother had kept, every picture, every letter she had never sent. Proof of what was, and what might have been. The next morning they stood in front of a tailor shop in Union Square. Neither of them had ever imagined wearing tuxedos, but if they were going to walk into Michael Bennett's world, they needed to look like they belonged. The tailor was a thin, precise man with sharp eyes. He measured without small talk, but as he pinned Alex's collar, he said, "Mr. Bennett was here last week, had his gala tuxedo altered." He smiled faintly, very particular about the details. "Just like you two." Jason met Alex's gaze in the mirror. It was strange, the parallels. How their paths seemed to mirror his, without even knowing it. That night they sat by their mother's bedside, the tuxedos hanging neatly in the closet at home. Sarah was sleeping, her breathing soft but steady. On the TV above her bed, a news segment played. Michael Bennett speaking at a tech conference, his voice smooth and steady. Today's youth, he was saying, need more than opportunity. They need second chances. Alex stared at the screen, his hands tightening on the bed rail. Second chances. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Their father offering the world a lifeline, while not even knowing he had two sons who had been growing up just a few miles away. The nurse came in quietly, checking Sarah's vitals. She smiled as she saw the TV. Mr. Bennett, he's done a lot for our hospital, especially the pediatric ward. Alex nodded, his throat tightening. Who would have thought? He said softly. A tech billionaire could be so human. Jason rested a hand on his brother's shoulder. He understood. They both did. The man on the screen was a stranger, and yet he was not. The day before the gala, the sky hung low and gray over the city. The fog rolled in thick and quiet, wrapping the streets in mist. Alex stood by the hospital window, watching the clouds move. His mother's voice brought him back. There's something else, Sarah said. Her voice was thin but steady. Something I never told you. Jason moved closer as Sarah pulled a worn envelope from under her pillow. It was creased, the edges softened like something touched too many times. I wrote him a letter, she said. 25 years ago. Her fingers shook as she handed it to Jason. I never sent it. Jason unfolded the pages carefully, his breath catching as he read. Dear Michael, by the time you read this, our sons will be born. They read it together, every word. Every hope, every fear. The choice she made it to walk away, to protect his life and their own. You never stopped loving him, Alex whispered. Sarah smiled faintly. I loved who he was, she said, and I love what we were. But I loved you too more. Later, back at their apartment, they prepared in silence. The tuxedos were ready. The journal and the letter packed carefully in Jason's briefcase. Alex practiced introductions in front of the mirror over and over. Mr. Bennett, we're your sons. Each time the words caught in his throat, Jason was making lists, scenarios, reactions. He was used to preparing arguments, but nothing in his legal career had prepared him for this. And then his phone buzzed. The hospital. Sarah's fever had spiked. They rushed back, Alex, switching immediately into Dr. Modi, Jason holding their mother's hand. It was worse than before, and time felt as if it was slipping away. Tomorrow, Alex said, staring out the window at the city lights. Tomorrow, we find out everything. Jason nodded. Or we find out nothing. Either way, they would be ready. The Augustine rose in front of them like something out of a dream, or maybe a memory they never had but always imagined. It's tall. Glass doors gleamed beneath the warm glow of copper sconces. Through the towering windows, they could see the soft light of crystal chandeliers, casting everything inside in a golden shimmer. People moved gracefully through the entrance of men in tailored suits, women evening gowns that whispered silk against polished floors. It was a world the twins had never stepped into until now. Jason adjusted his tie as they stood in front of the doors. Alex took a slow breath like he was about to walk into surgery. For a long moment, neither of them moved. You ready? Jason asked quietly. Alex gave a faint nod. No, he said. But we're here. The doorman gave them a polite, practiced smile as he opened the doors. Inside, the world softened, every edge smoothed by low music and quiet conversation. They handed over their invitations, elegant envelopes bearing their names in graceful handwriting, and the manager appeared almost instantly. Mr. Parker. Doc. Parker. Thomas smiled warmly, his voice low, almost reverent. We've been expecting you. For a second, Jason wondered if the man knew. But then he realized no. It was just hospitality, nothing more. Still, the words made his stomach twist. Table 7. That's where they were seated. Near enough to the front to see everything, but not so close that they stood out. Jason's eyes moved slowly across the room, noting faces he recognized from magazines, business articles, interviews. Titans of industry. Influencers, philanthropists. And somewhere among them was the man they had come to see. Their father. He's not here yet, Thomas said as he pulled out their chairs. He's running late, last-minute conference call. Jason nodded, slipping into the seat. His fingers brushed against the worn leather journal hidden in his jacket. It was a strange comfort having it close, like carrying a piece of Sarah with them into this world. The room was alive with murmurs, soft laughter, the clink of crystal against fine china. At their table, they were joined by a software engineer from Google, a biotech researcher, and a venture capitalist who introduced himself with a firm handshake and an eager grin. "You hear what Bennett's planning next?" the VC asked, leaning in conspiratorially. "Revolutionary AI education initiative. That man sees connections nobody else does." Jason forced a polite smile, but his mind was elsewhere. Alex was staring toward the entrance, his expression unreadable. Jason followed his gaze. The photographers had gathered. Phones slipped quietly into pockets. A hush spread slowly across the room, as if someone had turned down the volume on the world itself. And then he appeared. Michael Bennett. He moved through the entrance like he belonged there, like he had always belonged there. Tall, composite, his tuxedo fitting him, like it had been made for no one else. Which, of course, it probably had been. He shook hands as he moved, smiled at familiar faces, paused for brief conversations. He seemed at ease, but Jason noticed the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tapped once against his cufflink before every handshake. Alex was watching too, studying him. They exchanged a look, and without speaking, they knew this was real. Flesh and blood. Not an image on a screen. Not a face in a magazine. Their father. And then Thomas, the manager, passed by again, his voice lowered, almost an afterthought. "That's unusual," he murmured. "Miss Sir, Bennett's wearing his father's watch tonight." Alex frowned. "What?" Thomas smiled faintly. "The watch. He usually saves it for board meetings. Sentimental thing, I think." Jason glanced at the man standing at the front of the room. Sure enough, on his wrist, a vintage timepiece. The same one they'd seen in the old photo tucked into Sarah's journal. A piece of history ticking away quietly, just beneath the surface. The room hushed as Michael took his place at the podium. He adjusted his notes the same way Alex did when he was preparing for surgery. The same way Jason did before every closing argument. Small details, familiar gestures, like reflections of themselves, and they hadn't even realized. Michael's voice cut through the silence, clear and steady. "Good evening," he said. "Tonight, we're here to talk about second chances." Jason felt Alex shift beside him. The words were too close, too on the nose, as if the universe had written this speech just for them. Michael talked about opportunity, about transformation, about giving people the tools to build something better. He spoke with conviction, but Jason saw it, a flicker of something behind his eyes, something unsettled. And then the moment shattered. A nurse burst through the entrance, weaving through tables, her face pale, urgent. She stopped beside them, breathless. "Dr. Parker," she said, her voice louder than it should have been. "It's your mother. You need to come. Now." The room froze. Every eye turned toward them. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even Michael at the podium went silent. His gaze locked onto theirs. Jason stood first, his heart pounding. Alex was already moving. And then Michael spoke. Quietly but clearly into the microphone still clipped to his jacket. "Sarah Parker," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. A name had been buried under years of silency, suddenly rising to the surface. Alex stopped in his tracks. Jason turned slowly. Michael's hands were white, knuckled against the podium. "Your mother is Sarah Parker." Jason took a breath and gave a single, steady nod. "She is." Michael blinked as if trying to process a language he hadn't heard in decades. "The journal," he said quietly. "The coffee shop. You both of you twins." It wasn't just the guests watching anymore. It was the entire room holding its breath. Jason's voice was calm, clear. "She's been asking for you." Michael didn't hesitate. Not for 1 second. He stepped away from the podium, away from the crowd, away from the life he'd built for himself. My car is outside," he said. "We'll take it." And just like that, the carefully constructed world of Michael Bennett, the billionaire visionary, began to crack open. And something real, something raw slipped through. They moved quickly through the hushed crowd. No more speeches. No more polished smiles. Just 3 men bound by blood and a secret that was no longer secret. The ride to the hospital was silent at first. Michael sat between them, Sarah's journal open in his lap, his fingers tracing the pages she had written all those years ago. His breath came slower, no uneven. She never told me, he said at last, his voice rough. I would've. She wanted to protect you, Jason said quietly. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes still on the journal. And I spent 25 years trying to figure out what I lost. The car slowed as they pulled up to the hospital. Let's go, Alex said, his voice steady but his hands shaking. And as they walked through the hospital doors, 3 sets of footsteps in syncs, they were no longer strangers. The hallway was quiet, the kind of quiet that always seemed heavier in hospitals. Each step echoed softly, the polished floor reflecting the dim overhead lights. Jason glanced at his brother, at their father walking just a few paces ahead, the leathered journal still clutched in his hand. It was surreal watching him move through this world that had always belonged to them, but never to him. Until now. They reached Sarah's room, and for a moment none of them moved. Michael stood there, his hand resting on the doorframe, his eyes fixed on the small plaque beside the door. Sarah Parker, her name. Just as it had been all those years ago. He closed his eyes for a moment as if bracing himself. And then slowly he pushed the door open. Inside the lights were low. Machines hummed softly, steady beeps marking each heartbeat, each breath. Sarah lay still, but her eyes were open, watching them. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile that said everything she didn't have the strength to say out loud. Jason stepped forward first. Mum, he said gently. He's here. Sarah's gaze shifted, and for the first time in 25 years her eyes met Michael's. He crossed the room slowly, the journal still in his hands, and sat down in the chair beside her bed. For a long moment he didn't speak. He just looked at her, like he was memorizing her face all over again. I thought I'd lost you, he said quietly. Sarah's fingers moved weakly, reaching for his hand. He took it carefully, holding it like it was something fragile and irreplaceable. You didn't lose me, she whispered. I left, but Michael nodded, his throat working hard to swallow whatever words were stuck there. I searched, he said. At first. Then I thought you didn't want to be found. Sarah gave a faint smile. I didn't, she said. Not then. You had your life, your company, your marriage. I couldn't be the one who tore it apart. He shook his head slowly, his grip tightening slightly on her hand. You never would have. I wish you had told me. She exhaled a soft, tired breath. I told myself I was protecting you. But really I was scared. I didn't think you'd choose us. Michael closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of her words settling over him like something too heavy to carry. I missed it all, he said. Their first steps, first words. Sarah's gaze softened, but they became who they are because of how they grew up. He looked at his sons, then really looked at them. Jason, standing tall, steady as a stone. Alex, his expression serious but his eyes bright with emotion. Both of them watching him carefully. He could see himself in them. In their faces. In the way they stood. In the quiet determination behind their eyes. I see that now, Michael said. His voice was quieter, more certain. And I'm proud. Sarah's smile grew even as her eyelids fluttered with exhaustion. I wanted them to know you, to find you when they were ready. Jason stepped closer, pulling the envelope from his jacket pocket. He placed it gently on the blanket beside her. We found this, he said. The letter you never sent. Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the paper. I wrote so many of them, she murmured. But I was never brave enough. Michael reached out, covering her hand with his. You were brave, he said softly. You did everything for them. For a long moment the room was still, quiet. But it wasn't the silence of loss or regret. It was the silence of understanding, of something long broken, finally beginning to mend. Later, as Sarah slept, the 3 of them sat together in the small visitors' lounge down the hall. Jason leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it held answers he hadn't found yet. Alex sat back, his arms crossed, his fingers tapping an absent rhythm against his sleeve. Michael sat between them. The journal rested on his lap, open to a page where Sarah had pasted a photo of the boys at their high school graduation. They stood on either side of her, both of them grinning, holding their diplomas like trophies. You got scholarships. Michael said more to himself than them. Berkeley, Jason replied. Full ride? Michael nodded slowly. I went there, he said. That's where I met your mother. We know, Alex said. She told us. Michael's eyes stayed on the photo. She made sure you had everything you needed. Alex gave a quiet laugh. Not everything, he said. We had to work for it. She made sure of that too. Michael smiled faintly. Sounds like her. For a while they sat in silence. The city stretched out beyond the window lights flickering through the fog. Then Jason spoke. She told us about you, he said. Not just what you built, but who you were. Why she loved you. Michael's gaze moved slowly from the photo to his son's. I was so focused on building something, he said. I thought if I made enough, changed enough, it would fill the emptiness. Ah. And did it? Alex asked. Michael gave a tired smile. No, he said quietly. But I didn't realize why. Until now, Jason studied him. What do you want to do? Michael closed the journal gently. I want to make it right, he said. If you'll let me. Alex looked at his brother. Jason met his gaze. And in that look there was an answer, not perfect, not complete, but a beginning. There's a gala happening tomorrow night. Jason said, we were planning to show you something. Michael tilted his head. What? Alex leaned forward. An education initiative. AI software built for underfunded schools. We've been working on it for years. Michael's eyes brightened just a little. You followed in my footsteps. No. Jason said, we followed in hers. You're just part of the equation. Michael sat back, nodding slowly. I'd like to see it. You will, Jason said. The room was quiet again. But this time it wasn't heavy. Later, as they stood outside Sarah's room, Alex placed a hand on Michael's shoulder. She always said, he murmured, that second chances don't come often. Michael gave a quiet nod. I'm not wasting this one. They stood there for a long time watching Sarah sleep, the steady rhythm of her breathing, the slow rise and fall of hope. And in that moment they all understood. Life wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up. About being there even if you were late. Morning came quietly, gray light spilling through the windows, soft and muted like a whispered promise. San Francisco's fog still hung low, wrapping the streets in its cool, damp hush. But inside the hospital, there was a different kind of stillness. Not heavy, not hopeless, just quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something is beginning, even if you don't know what it is yet. Jason stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, watching the city slowly wake up. Alex sat in a chair beside their mother's bed, holding her hand. As she slept, her breathing steady, her pulse strong beneath his fingers. Michael had stepped out for coffee, his first time leaving the room since he arrived. And when he returned, he wasn't carrying just coffee. In his hands were 3 mugs, one for each of them. He set them down carefully on the small table. Didn't know how you take it, he said quietly. Alex looked up. Black's fine, he murmured. Jason turned from the window, his eyes on his father. Same. Michael nodded. He sat down slowly in the chair on Sarah's other side, and for a few minutes they drank their coffee in silence. It wasn't awkward. It wasn't forced. It just was. Sarah stirred, her eyes fluttering open, focusing slowly. When she saw them, all 3 of them, she smiled. Soft. Content. Like something had finally settled in her chest. I never thought I'd see this, she said quietly. Jason leaned in. It's happening, he replied. Sarah's fingers brushed Michael's. They're good men, she whispered. They got the best of you. Michael's throat worked, but he didn't speak. He just held her hand tighter. Later that afternoon, they left her to rest. Michael followed them back to their apartment, small and worn around the edges but filled with warmth. The kind of place that told a story. Photographs lined the walls. Jason and Alex, younger versions of themselves, with Sarah always there between them. Smiling, laughing. Proud. Michael stood in the center of the living room, turning slowly, taking it all in. He paused in front of a photo from their college graduation. She was there, he said softly. She never missed a thing. Alex nodded. No, she didn't. Jason motioned toward the dining table. It was covered in papers, blueprints, code. A laptop sat open, running lines of script in quiet motion. This is the project, Jason said. What we've been working on. Michael stepped closer, his eyes scanning the pages with practiced precision. It took him seconds to understand what he was looking at. His hands moved over the documents, tracing their work. He pointed to a section of code. "This algorithm, it's elegant," he murmured. Alex gave a small, satisfied nod. "It adapts in real time, reads the student's behavior, modifies the lesson." Jason added quietly, "And it's designed for accessibility, language barriers, learning disabilities." Michael was silent for a moment. "You did this without any of my help." Jason shook his head. "We did this because of Mom, and because we wanted to prove we could." Michael smiled faintly. "You did." There was a quiet pride in his voice, not loud, not boastful, just real. They worked together for hours that day. Michael pulled up a chair, and they went through every detail. He asked questions, offered suggestions, but he didn't take over. He didn't try to lead. He just became part of it. And it felt strange, but also right. By evening, they had something they were ready to show the world, or at least the people who mattered. The gala was tomorrow night. Jason stood at the window staring out at the city again. Alex sat at the kitchen counter flipping through the journal one last time. Michael sat on the couch holding a photo in his hands. It was Sarah Younger laughing at something just out of frame. "She made me believe," he said quietly. "When we were young, she believed in things I couldn't see yet." Alex looked up. "She still does." That night they all slept lightly, knowing what tomorrow could bring. The morning of the gala, the air felt different. The fog had lifted early, and the sunlight was sharp against the buildings. The Augustine stood gleaming, as if it had been waiting for them. Jason and Alex adjusted their tuxedos in the lobby mirror, their reflections clean, crispy ready. Michael joined them moments later, his own tuxedo tailored to perfection. But it wasn't the suit that made him stand out. It was the expression on his face. Calm. Steady. Like he was stepping into something that mattered, something that had been waiting for him all along. Thomas greeted them warmly. "Table 1 tonight," he said with a nod. "At Mr. Bennett's request." Jason smiled faintly. "Thank you." They moved through the room together, and this time people noticed. Heads turned, conversations paused, whispers followed them, but none of it mattered. At their table, Michael placed the journal beside his notes. He rested his hand on it briefly, a silent acknowledgement of what had brought them there. The room filled slowly, the soft hum of conversation rising like music. Jason and Alex sat on either side of their father, a symmetry that felt deliberate but wasn't. As the evening began, Michael took the podium. He didn't look at his notes. He didn't need to. 4 years, he said, his voice steady, calm. "I believed success was measured by what we build, by the legacy of our work." He paused, letting the silence hold his words. "But I was wrong," he continued. "Success is measured by the connections we make, the people we love, the family we hold close." There was a murmur in the room. A shift, people leaning in, listening closer. He gestured toward Jason and Alex. "These are my sons," he said quietly. "And together we've built something new. Something that will change the way we educate, the way we reach those who need it most." On the screen behind him, their project came to life. Bennett Bridge. A platform that could open doors for students everywhere, no matter their circumstances. And as he spoke, Jason watched the room, saw the impact of his father's words, saw how people responded not just to the technology, but to the story. Alex sat quietly, his eyes on the screen, on their mother's journal, sitting at the center of the table. This was for her. As the applause rose, as cameras flashed, as people crowded in to congratulate them, Michael stayed close to his sons, his family, the thing he had spent a lifetime searching for without realizing it. Later that night, as the crowd thinned, they stepped outside together. The city spread out before them, lights glittering against the dark sky. "You did good," Michael said quietly. Jason smiled. "So did you." And for the first time, it didn't feel like they were from different worlds. It felt like they were exactly where they were supposed to be. The night air was crispy, cool enough that you could see the faintest cloud of breath with every exhale. Jason stood at the railing, his hands wrapped around a glass of water, staring out over the city skyline. The gala was still going on behind them, louder and music, and the faint clinking of glasses drifting through the open doors. But out here it was quiet. Alex joined him a moment later, slipping his hands into his pockets, his tuxedo jacket open. "It's strange," he said softly. "How normal this feels." Jason gave a small smile. "Yeah." Behind them the door opened again and Michael stepped out. He had loosened his tee, undone the top button of his shirt. He looked different, less like the man on magazine covers. More like someone you could sit down with and just talk. For a few moments none of them said anything. They just stood there, the three of them, watching the lights of San Francisco flicker against the night sky. "I missed so much," Michael said quietly. His voice wasn't heavy, just honest. "I used to think I was doing it all for family, but I didn't even know what that meant." Alex turned, studying him for a moment. "You know now?" Michael nodded. "I think so." Jason watched his father, not as the billionaire, not as the tech visionary, but as a man trying to make sense of everything he thought he knew. "It's not too late," Jason said quietly. Michael exhaled slowly. "That's what your mother said." He glanced toward the door, toward the journal still sitting at their table inside. "She always believed in second chances." "She gave us one," Alex said. Michael smiled faintly. "No, I need to earn it." And there was something about the way he said it, steady, certain, that made both Jason and Alex believe him. Later that night, they returned to the hospital together. The gala had ended, the Augustins' glittering halls, now quiet, but Sarah was still awake when they arrived. Her eyes brightened when she saw them, all three of them. "You look good," she said softly, her voice thin, but strong enough to carry her pride. Jason sat on one side of her bed, Alex on the other. Michael pulled up the chair between them. He took her hand in his, holding it gently. "You were right," he said, "about second chances." Sarah smiled, her fingers brushing his wrist where the old watch rested. "You found your way back," she whispered. He nodded. "With their help." They talked for hours that night. About everything and nothing. The years that had passed, the moments they had missed. The childhoods he hadn't witnessed, the milestones he had read about in Sarah's journal, finally filling in the blanks. Jason told him about their first science fair win, how they'd stayed up for 2 days straight building an AI project that barely worked, but was good enough to get them to regionals. Alex talked about medical school and how there were nights he almost quit but didn't. Because of her, because of Jason, because of who they were and where they came from. Michael listened, asked questions, smiled at the right moments, laughed softly when Alex joked about Jason's obsessive list making. And when Sarah drifted off to sleep peaceful, they stayed, sitting quietly together in that small room, as if they'd been doing it all their lives. The next few days moved differently. Michael cleared his schedule completely. No meetings, no calls, no obligations beyond the hospital and his family. He arranged for Sarah to be moved into a private room, but not the kind with marble floors and staff that used her first name like she was a celebrity. No. It was a room with sunlight, with space for Jason and Alex to sit comfortably, and a window that looked out over the park she used to take them to when they were little. Sarah insisted on seeing the software again. Jason and Alex set it up on her tablet, walking her through every feature, every tool. She smiled through tears, pride clear in her expression. "You did this," she said softly. "You both did this." "We had help," Alex replied, glancing at their father. Michael stood behind them, his hand resting on Jason's shoulder. "This is just the beginning." They named the platform Bennett Bridge, but Sarah added her touch. She suggested including her maiden name in the tagline, Parker Bennett Educational Initiative, because bridges need two sides, she said. Michael smiled. "You always had the better ideas." On one of the days when Sarah was feeling stronger, they took her outside, into the park across from Bennett Innovations. They found the bench where she used to sit, watching Jason and Alex play and pointing to the tall building and telling them to dream big. She rested there, bundled in a warm blanket, watching people pass by. And for a moment it was like time folded in on itself. Jason sat beside her, Alex crouched by her chair, and Michael stood behind them, his hands on both their shoulders. "This," she whispered, "was always the dream." As spring melted into summer, Sarah's strength waxed and waned. There were days when she smiled, laughed, told them stories about the early days of coding in coffee shops and libraries, chasing big ideas with bigger dreams. And there were days when the hospital room was dim and quiet, and they just held her hand. Michael stayed close through all of it. He set up an office in the hospital lounge, worked between doctor visits and quiet talks with Sarah. Jason and Alex found themselves falling into a rhythm they'd never imagined. Breakfast meetings with their father, strategy sessions for the platform planning outreach for schools and districts across the state. They argued, debated, discussed every detail. And yet it wasn't the tense, impersonal dynamic of a CEO with his employees. It was something different, something better. They challenged each other, but always with respect, always with trust. On one quiet evening, Jason found Michael sitting in Sarah's room, reading aloud from one of her favorite books. His voice was low, steady, almost gentle. Alex stood in the doorway with Jason, watching them for a moment before stepping inside. "You're different," Jason said quietly. Michael glanced up. "I think I'm just me." Finally, they sat together, sharing memories, making plans. Michael told them about the early days of Bennett Innovations, how he almost lost everything more times than he could count. How Sarah's belief in him, even after she left, had always stayed with him. "I didn't know," he said, "but I felt it." Jason smiled faintly. "She believed in you." "So do we," Alex added. It wasn't just about the platform anymore. It wasn't even about the success of Bennett Innovations. It was about them as a family building something together. And Sarah, watching it all unfold, knew she had made the right choice, even if it had taken years to see it. That night, as the city lights flickered on, they sat by the window together, silent, watching the world move below them. And for the first time in a long time, none of them felt like something was missing. 6 months later, the world looked different. It wasn't that San Francisco had changed. The streets still bustled with energy, the fog still rolled in each morning like a familiar old friend, and the skyline still shimmered with light as evening fell. But for Jason, for Alex, and for Michael, everything had shifted. Not in the loud, obvious ways, but in the quiet ones that matter most. The Augustine was glowing again tonight, its grand dining room full of people, laughter, and hope. But this time it wasn't about charity galas or high-profile speeches. This was something different, something more personal. The Bennett Bridge Foundation was being launched. Jason stood near the podium, his hands resting on the smooth surface, breathing slowly as he looked out over the crowd. Alex stood beside him, adjusting the mic slightly, his fingers steady and sure. And next to them, Michael. He wore the same tuxedo, the same watch on his wrist, but he was not the same man who had stood there months before. There was something different in his eyes now. Something quieter, stronger, whole. Sarah sat in the front row, her hair a little shorter, her face still pale, but her eyes bright. Alive. She watched them with a pride so fierce it was almost its own light. Michael stepped forward first, his voice steady, clear. "For a long time," he said, "I thought success was about innovation, about breaking boundaries, building things the world had never seen before. And for a while that worked. Until I realized there was something I'd missed. The most important connection, the one that changes everything." He glanced toward Sarah, toward his sons. Family. The room was still, silent in that electric way that means people are truly listening. "I spent years building bridges in technology," he continued, "and I forgot about the bridges that lead us home." He stepped back and Alex moved forward. His hands rested on the podium, but his gaze was on Sarah. "Where Mother taught us that every person deserves a chance to reach their full potential," he said softly. "She showed you that it's not about where you come from. It's about who you choose to become." He paused, glancing at Jason. "And she believed that second chances matter, that sometimes we get to rewrite the story." Jason took his place beside his brother. "We were raised by a woman who believed in hard work and quiet strength," he said, "who gave us a life filled with determination and grace. And now we're taking that legacy and using it to build something new." The presentation behind them came to life. The Bennett Bridge software, sleek and intuitive, filling the screen. Images of classrooms, students from every background, learning in ways they never could before. AI technology adapting in real time, removing barriers, creating opportunity. Michael spoke again. Bennett Innovations and the Parker Bennett Foundation will be providing this platform free of charge to every underfunded school in California, and soon nationwide. The applause was immediate, low, genuine. But the three of them, Jason, Alex, and Michael, didn't look at the crowd. They looked at Sarah, and she smiled. After the presentation, after the handshakes and congratulations, they found themselves in a quiet corner of the Augustine. The same corner where Jason and Alex had first sat months ago, trying to decide how to confront the man who had unknowingly shaped their lives. No, it was something else entirely. Sarah joined them, resting her hand on Michael's. "You've built something beautiful," she said quietly. Michael smiled. "We all did." Jason handed her a new journal. Its cover was smooth, the pages blank. "Waiting for the next chapter," he said. Sarah ran her hand over the cover slowly. "I think this time we'll write it together." They stood there for a while, watching the city outside the tall windows. The fog was rolling in, but it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt close, like a blanket pulled tight around them. A few weeks later, Michael moved his office out of the towering glass headquarters and into a smaller space near the children's hospital. Closer to Sarah, closer to his sons. They worked together, meeting every morning for coffee in the same shop where Alex had first bumped into him. And sometimes they sat on the bench across from Bennett Innovations, the one where Sarah had once watched them play without ever telling them who they were really watching. No, they sat there together, laughing, planning, dreaming. Alex expanded his medical work, combining it with the platform's development, creating new features for children with complex learning needs. Jason worked on the legal side, ensuring that no school, no child would ever be left behind because of red tape or funding. Michael guided them, listened, learned, and Sarah, she got stronger slowly, but surely. Some days she walked with them through the park. Other days, she sat in the sunlight watching them as they built something new together. Months passed, and one morning, as the sun rose over the bay, Michael found himself standing at the window of his new office. He sipped his coffee slowly, watching the light catch on the water. He smiled faintly. And for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the next deal or the next big innovation. He was thinking about dinner with his sons, about Sarah's laugh, about the way Alex and Jason argued over coding best practices like it was life or death. He was thinking about home. Later that afternoon, they met at the hospital garden. Jason had brought lunch. Alex had news about a grant they'd secured for expanding the platform. Sarah was already there, reading on a bench in the sun. They sat together, eating, talking, laughing. It was simple, ordinary, and yet it wasn't. It was everything. Michael glanced around at them, and for a moment he couldn't believe how close he had come to never finding this, to never knowing them, to never understanding what truly mattered. But he had found them. They had found him. And together they were building something that would last. That night, as the city settled into sleep, Sarah wrote in her new journal, her handwriting steady. "Calm. Some bridges take time to build," she wrote, "but the ones worth crossing are the ones that bring us home." Outside the window, San Francisco glowed softly in the fog, and inside, a family whole again,